I never thought I'd find myself standing in my own driveway, squinting into the afternoon sun at two police officers whose hands were hovering just a little too close to their holsters for my comfort. The reason for this suburban tableau of flashing lights and nervous neighbors peeking through their blinds? A woman, my new HOA president, was standing on my lawn, jabbing a finger at my garage and screaming that I had stolen her car. Not a similar car. Her car. A car that, at that very moment, was sitting safely in her own garage 3 streets over. My name is Alex, and my life, up until that point, had been deliberately, beautifully boring. I work from home as a digital forensics and data recovery specialist. My world is one of quiet clicks, logical pathways, and the meticulous reconstruction of truth from shattered hard drives and corrupted files. I find digital needles in haystacks. My passion, my escape from the world of bits and bytes, is decidedly analog, restoring my 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1. It's my sanctuary, a tangible piece of history I brought back to life with my own hands. My desire for a peaceful existence was the primary reason I moved into this meticulously planned community. I wanted quiet weekends, the scent of cut grass, and the kind of neighbors who nod politely and leave you alone. What I got was Brenda. She had won the recent HOA election on a vaguely terrifying platform of restoring neighborhood values, which, in practice, meant measuring the height of everyone's lawn with a ruler and leaving passive-aggressive notes about recycling bin placement. She walked with an air of self-importance that suggested she wasn't just the HOA president. She was the sole arbiter of suburban decency. The inciting incident for my personal nightmare was, ironically, her own good fortune. She'd bought herself a toy, a recently restored, cherry red '69 Mustang. It was a beautiful car, I'll admit. Almost as beautiful as mine, which was a deep, midnight blue. They were the same model year, but that's where the similarities ended for anyone with a discerning eye. To Brenda, however, seeing mine with the garage door open was like seeing a ghost of her new, expensive purchase. Instead of curiosity or camaraderie, her mind leaped across a chasm of logic into a paranoid fantasy. And that fantasy led to a 911 call and 2 very confused police officers trying to mediate a situation that was patently absurd. They left, of course, after I calmly produced my title, my registration, and the car's VIN plate, which naturally didn't match the paperwork for the vehicle she had purchased just days before. They gave her a stern warning about misusing emergency services. But Brenda wasn't swayed by facts. She was insulted by them. As she stomped back to her house, she shot me a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. What Brenda didn't know, what she couldn't possibly comprehend, was that my entire profession is built around dismantling narratives just like hers. People lie, they delete, they obscure, but the data rarely does. She assumed I was just some grease monkey, a hobbyist who wouldn't fight back. She had no idea that in her baseless, hysterical accusation, she hadn't just picked a fight. She had initiated a forensic investigation, and she was the primary subject. Have you ever dealt with someone so utterly convinced of their own righteousness that reality itself becomes a minor inconvenience? This story is for you. It's the detailed account of how I took the quiet, meticulous skills I used to recover deleted files and applied them to deconstruct a petty tyrant's reign, not with anger, but with an overwhelming avalanche of undeniable, documented proof. She wanted a war over a car. I was about to give her one fought with data points, public records, and her own digital ghost. The departure of the police cars didn't bring relief, only a tense, ringing silence. The neighborhood's curtain twitchers retreated, and I was left with the smoldering glare of Brenda from across the street. Any rational person would have felt a sting of embarrassment, a moment of self-reflection after being told by law enforcement that they were, in no uncertain terms, completely wrong. But Brenda wasn't rational. She was enraged. Her public humiliation wasn't a lesson. It was an injury, and she was determined to make me the one who paid for it. My first attempt at a resolution was to go through the proper channels. I wrote a calm, factual letter to the HOA board detailing the incident. I described the baseless accusation, the 911 call, and the public disturbance. I requested a formal apology and an assurance that this kind of harassment would not continue from the president of our association. I was, in retrospect, adorably naive. The response I received 2 days later was a masterclass in bureaucratic deflection. It was a single-page letter, signed by the board's secretary but clearly written in Brenda's venomous ink. It stated that the board supports President Brenda in her proactive efforts to ensure neighborhood security, and that they cannot comment on active disputes between residents. It was a complete dismissal. My complaint wasn't just ignored. It was validated as a legitimate action on her part. This green light was all Brenda needed. The escalation was immediate and relentless. The very next day, an official HOA violation notice appeared on my door. The infraction? Operating an unlicensed automotive repair facility, my hobby, conducted entirely within the confines of my own garage with the door usually closed, was now a business. The notice came with a $100 fine. 3 days later, another one arrived. Unapproved vehicle modifications. This was particularly baffling, as the car was in my garage, out of public view. Was she peering through my windows? The third notice, a week later, was for improper storage of chemical waste, citing a sealed, regulation oil disposal container tucked neatly in the corner of my garage. The fines were stacking up, but it was the psychological warfare that truly grated. Brenda took her campaign to the community Facebook group. Without naming me, she posted long, rambling screeds about protecting our community from disruptive elements and the importance of reporting suspicious activity. She wrote about people who flout the rules and lower property values, and individuals who may not be who they seem. It was a classic campaign of insinuation, painting me as a neighborhood menace. My quiet life was over. My peaceful sanctuary had become a battleground. It was clear that reason and rules were weapons only she was allowed to wield. So, I decided to stop playing by her rules and start playing by mine. My job has taught me that the first step in any investigation is meticulous documentation. Every interaction, every piece of paper, every digital whisper becomes a potential piece of evidence. I saved the violation notices. I installed a small, high-resolution security camera with audio capabilities above my garage door, giving me a clear view of my driveway and the street. I began taking screenshots of every passive-aggressive post she made on the community page, archiving them in a dated folder on my secure server. This was the foundation, the baseline of her harassment. But to truly dismantle her, I needed to understand her. I needed to move from defense to offense. My investigation into Brenda began not with malice, but with a quiet, methodical purpose. I started with public records, the kind of information anyone can access if they know where to look. I looked up her property records, tax filings, and then, out of curiosity, I looked into the car that started it all. I easily found the dealership where she'd bought it, and, through their archived online listings, the original ad for her red Mustang. I saved all the pictures, the description, everything. Then I dug deeper. Where did the dealership get the car? Most used cars, especially classics, go through auctions. A few hours of searching auction house databases, and I found it. The auction listing was a goldmine. It included a comprehensive vehicle history report. I downloaded it immediately. As I scanned the report, I felt the first real thrill of the hunt. Her car, while cosmetically beautiful, had a documented history of persistent electrical problems, specifically with the alternator and voltage regulator. This wasn't just a hunch, it was on the record. The aha moment, however, came from a different vector entirely. People like Brenda, those with an outsized sense of self-importance and a need to be heard, often leave a vast digital footprint. I started searching for usernames associated with email addresses I found in public HOA documents. It didn't take long to find her on a popular classic car enthusiast forum. And there it was, in black and white. A series of posts from a month before she even bought the car. Under a thinly veiled username, she was asking other owners about the 1969 Mach 1 model. Her questions were specific. Is it true this model is known for battery drain issues? And how expensive is it to replace an alternator and rewire the dash? She knew. She knew exactly what potential problems the car had before she ever signed the paperwork. The final, beautiful nail in the coffin of her story came when I cross-referenced the VIN from her car's history report with posts on that same forum. I found a post from the previous owner, 2 years prior, complaining bitterly about an electrical issue that left him stranded. He mentioned the diagnostic codes, the failed parts, and, bless his meticulous heart, the last 6 digits of his VIN to see if it was part of a known faulty batch. It was a perfect match. I now had an unbreakable, time-stamped digital chain of evidence proving that Brenda's narrative wasn't just wrong. It was a deliberate lie. She hadn't mistaken my car for hers. She was terrified that she had bought a lemon, and when she saw my pristine, perfectly running version, she created a fantasy to project her buyer's remorse and make me the villain in her story of woe. She wasn't a victim. She was preparing to be a perpetrator of fraud, perhaps against the dealership or a warranty company, and I was her scapegoat. The investigation was no longer just about defending myself. It was about exposing a fraud. My initial sense of triumph was quickly tempered by a sobering reality. Having the truth and being able to use it effectively are two very different things. Simply confronting Brenda with screenshots from an internet forum would result in more screaming, more denial, and likely accusations of hacking or stalking. I couldn't just present the evidence to the HOA board. They were her loyal subjects. I needed a different kind of stage, a different strategy. I needed to create a situation where the evidence would be irrefutable and the impact inescapable. My first move was to seek counsel. While I was an expert in the digital domain, I was a novice in the world of bylaws and bureaucratic warfare. I noticed that several other residents had been on the receiving end of Brenda's reign. One of them was Frank, a retired corporate lawyer in his late 70s who lived down the block. He'd been receiving increasingly threatening notices about the placement of his decorative garden gnomes. He found the situation more amusing than threatening, but his patience was clearly wearing thin. I scheduled a coffee with him, laying out my predicament and, more importantly, my evidence. I showed him the violation notices, the screenshots of the Facebook posts, the vehicle history report, and the forum messages. As he scrolled through the files on my tablet, his amused smirk slowly hardened into a sharp, focused frown. He looked up at me, his eyes gleaming with a kind of intellectual fire I imagine made him a terror in a courtroom. "This isn't just harassment, Alex," he said, his voice low and firm. "This is a calculated abuse of power. The financial documents are the key. The car stuff is brilliant character evidence, but the misuse of HOA funds, that's the kill shot." He was referring to another discovery I'd made while combing through the HOA's quarterly budget reports, which were available to all homeowners online. I had noticed that the payments to Oakwood Landscaping Services had increased by nearly 30% since Brenda took office. On a hunch, I'd spent an afternoon discreetly observing their work. As I suspected, the HOA contracted crew was spending a significant amount of time performing extensive, elaborate work on Brenda's private property, new flower beds, mulching, even planting a new ornamental tree. The invoices, however, were billed to the HOA under vague descriptions like common area beautification. It was blatant, arrogant theft. Frank and I spent the next week formulating a multi-pronged plan. It was a beautiful piece of strategic architecture. Phase 1 was what we called the Trojan horse. Brenda, in her infinite hubris, had already announced she was calling a special community town hall to discuss the recent rise in homeowner noncompliance. It was her show, designed to publicly shame residents like me and Frank. Our plan was to use her own event against her. According to the HOA bylaws, a petition signed by just 15% of homeowners could force an official vote on any matter at a special meeting, including the removal of a board member. We would co-opt her town hall and turn it into a referendum on her presidency. Phase 2 was the information campaign. Frank and I divided up a list of homeowners who had either received violation notices or had privately expressed frustration with Brenda's leadership. We approached them not with anger, but with quiet, factual concern. We showed them the evidence of the financial misappropriation. We didn't even have to show them the correlated evidence. The misuse of their own money was more than enough to ignite their fury. Within 3 days, we had signatures from over 40% of the homeowners. We legally filed the petition with the HOA secretary, a timid woman who looked like she'd seen a ghost when Frank handed her the stack of papers. According to the bylaws, she was now required to add a vote of no confidence and motion for removal of President Brenda to the official agenda of the upcoming town hall. Phase 3 was the presentation. This was my domain. I was to be the one to lay out the case against Brenda in front of the entire community. I began building a meticulous PowerPoint presentation. It wasn't going to be an angry tirade. It would be a cold, logical, and systematic dismantling of her credibility, brick by brick. Each slide was a self-contained fact, supported by an undeniable document. The title reports, the forum screenshots, the financial statements, the annotated invoices from the landscaping company. It was all there. I even embedded a short, time-lapsed video compiled from my new security camera, showing the HOA landscapers working exclusively on her yard for hours on end, on 3 separate occasions. All the while, Brenda remained blissfully unaware, cocooned in her own arrogance. She sent out a revised agenda for the meeting, and our motion was buried at the very bottom, worded in bland, bureaucratic language she probably assumed no one would understand. She was so focused on her plan to publicly humiliate me that she couldn't see the elaborate, perfectly constructed trap being laid right at her feet. She was building her own gallows, and I was just handing her the rope, one digital file at a time. The day of reckoning was approaching, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm. It wasn't the peace I had originally sought, but the quiet confidence of a man who held all the cards. The execution of our plan began 48 hours before the town hall meeting. Frank, with the precision of a seasoned legal strategist, sent a formal, certified letter to each member of the HOA board, including Brenda. The letter didn't reveal our full hand, but it officially put them on notice. It stated that at the upcoming meeting, significant evidence of financial malfeasance and a pattern of targeted harassment by the current president will be presented to the homeowners for their consideration in relation to the motion for her removal. It was a warning shot, designed to rattle them and prevent them from trying any procedural tricks to shut us down during the meeting. It ensured they couldn't later claim they were blindsided. The letter worked. I saw the mail truck make its delivery to Brenda's house from my office window. A few hours later, I saw her stomping around her yard, phone pressed to her ear, her face a mask of fury. She was likely calling the other board members, who were probably in a similar state of panic. They were cornered. Canceling the meeting now would look like an admission of guilt. Proceeding would mean walking into our ambush. They chose the latter, likely convinced Brenda could shout her way out of it, as she always had. My own preparation was focused and intense. I rehearsed my presentation, timing it perfectly. I wanted it to be a crisp, professional, and utterly damning narrative. Each slide transitioned to the next, building a story that started with a ridiculous claim about a stolen car and ended with the irrefutable proof of embezzlement. I converted every document to a high-resolution image, highlighting the relevant sections in red boxes so they would be impossible to miss, even from the back of the room. I set up a small, powerful projector and tested it with my laptop. The final piece of my preparation was personal. I took my Mustang for a long drive the evening before the meeting. With the windows down and the rumble of the V8 engine filling the air, I felt a sense of clarity. This was never just about the car. It was about the principle. Brenda had tried to take my peace, tarnish my name, and abuse my community. My response had to be as thorough and well-constructed as the engine I had so lovingly rebuilt. On the night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was buzzing with an energy it hadn't seen in years. It was standing room only. I saw faces I hadn't seen at an HOA meeting ever. Frank and I had successfully mobilized the silent majority, the people who usually just paid their dues and kept to themselves. We took seats in the front row, positioning the projector on a small table. I connected it to my laptop and put the screen on a standby image, the official HOA logo. It was a subtle touch, suggesting what was to come was not a personal attack, but official business. Brenda and her board sat at a long table at the front of the room, looking unusually tense. Brenda, however, had put on her game face. She was dressed in a severe-looking blazer, her expression a mixture of forced pleasantry and barely concealed contempt. She opened the meeting with a series of tedious announcements, her voice tight. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was waiting. Finally, she arrived at her pet agenda item. Addressing homeowner disputes and security concerns, she adjusted the microphone and her eyes locked onto mine. "It has come to my attention," she began, her voice dripping with faux concern, "that some residents are engaging in activities that violate our community's standards and could even pose a security risk." She was about to launch into her thinly veiled attack on me. This was the moment we had planned for. Before she could continue, Frank stood up, tall and composed. "Point of order, Madam President," he said, his voice calm, but carrying easily through the silent room. Brenda stopped, startled. According to Section 4, Article 3 of the bylaws, Frank continued, holding up a copy of the document, a petition-driven motion must be given precedence over standard agenda items. We must therefore address the motion for a vote of no confidence immediately. The board members exchanged panicked glances. The secretary fumbled with her papers, and the treasurer refused to make eye contact with anyone. Brenda's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "This is highly irregular, Frank," she snapped. "We will get to your little motion at the end of the meeting. I'm afraid the bylaws are quite clear on this," Frank replied smoothly, not yielding the floor. "The motion must be addressed now. I believe the secretary has confirmed the validity of the petition signatures." All eyes turned to the secretary, who looked down at her notes and mumbled, "Yes, the petition is valid." A murmur went through the crowd. Brenda was trapped. Her own rules, the ones she loved to wield against others, were now being used to box her in. With a look of pure venom, she spat into the microphone. "Fine. The floor is yours, Frank." Frank simply nodded and said, "I yield my time to Mr. Alex." As I stood up and walked to the podium with my laptop, I could feel every eye in the room on me. Brenda scoffed, leaning into the mic to say, "I'm sure we're all fascinated to hear what Mr. Fix-It has to say." The trap was set. The audience was captive, and the show was about to begin. I placed my laptop on the podium and connected it to the projector. The HOA logo on the screen behind the board members was replaced by the first slide of my presentation. It was a simple, powerful image, a high-resolution, side-by-side photograph of my midnight blue Mustang and Brenda's cherry red one. The room fell silent. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady and amplified by the microphone. "My name is Alex. Many of you know me only as the subject of recent warnings about suspicious activity and as the person accused of stealing our HOA president's new car. I'm here tonight to talk about the truth. Let's start with the cars." I clicked to the next slide. It showed the two photos again, but this time with circles and callouts. To a casual observer, these cars might look similar. To an enthusiast, they are worlds apart. "My car," I said, gesturing to the photo on the left, has custom side view mirrors, a non-standard hood scoop, and a different chrome trim package. Most importantly, the paint code is black jade, a distinct factory color. Brenda's car is candy apple red. They are as different as two classic cars can be. I heard a few chuckles from the audience. Brenda was staring at the screen, her jaw tight. I clicked again. But let's not rely on observation. Let's use facts. The next slide displayed two official-looking documents, scanned images of the vehicle titles. This is my title, registered to me for the past 5 years. And this is Brenda's title, registered to her just last month. As you can see, the vehicle identification numbers, the legal fingerprint of a car, are completely different. There is no dispute. These are two separate vehicles. Brenda couldn't contain herself. "He could have forged those," she yelled, her voice shrill. "I didn't have to," I replied calmly, not looking at her. "Because the most important difference isn't on paper. It's in the data." The next slide was a screenshot from the Classic Car Forum. It showed the previous owner of her car complaining about electrical problems, and it clearly displayed the last 6 digits of her car's VIN. This is a post from the car's previous owner, from 2 years ago, detailing the chronic electrical issues with the vehicle Brenda now owns. I clicked again, and a new screenshot appeared beside it. And this is a post from Brenda herself, under her username Bamabel82, from 1 week before she purchased the car, asking specifically about those very same electrical issues on this model. A collective gasp went through the room. It was the digital smoking gun. Her accusation wasn't a mistake. It was a premeditated lie. I paused to let the weight of it sink in. This was never about a stolen car. It was about a defective one. This was about laying the groundwork for a fraudulent claim, and I was chosen to be the scapegoat. I turned to look directly at Brenda. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fury. She was speechless, but I wasn't finished. This pattern of dishonesty, of creating a false narrative to benefit oneself at the expense of others, is not limited to this car. It extends directly to her role as president of this community. The next slide was a bombshell, a side-by-side comparison of the HOA's landscaping budget from last year and this year, showing the massive increase. Next to it was a detailed invoice from Oakwood Landscaping for common area maintenance, and next to that, a crystal-clear, time-stamped photo taken from my security camera showing the entire Oakwood crew installing a brand-new stone pathway on Brenda's private property on the very date of that invoice. The room erupted in murmurs and angry whispers. "This is your money," I said, my voice rising with controlled force. "Paying for her personal garden upgrades. While she is fining Frank for his garden gnomes, she is using our dues to landscape her backyard." I moved to the final slides. They were a rapid-fire succession of the bogus violation notices she had sent me and at least 5 other residents, contrasted with photos proving the absurdity of the claims. The oil container in the corner of my garage, the pristine state of another neighbor's unkept yard, the exact height of someone's non-compliant fence measured against the HOA's own rules. It was a comprehensive portfolio of her abuse of power. I turned off the projector, and the room was plunged back into normal light. I looked at the board, then at the stunned faces of my neighbors, and finally at Brenda. She was on her feet, trembling with rage. "Lies. All of it. This is slander. He hacked my accounts. He doctored those photos." Her defense was a chaotic spray of accusations, but it had no substance. The evidence had been too clean, too methodical, too overwhelming. She looked to her fellow board members for support, but they wouldn't meet her eyes. The treasurer was staring at the blank screen as if the invoice was still burned onto his retinas. The secretary was pretending to be absorbed in her notes. They were abandoning a sinking ship. Frank stood up once more, his presence commanding the room back to order. "I believe the evidence speaks for itself," he said, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "I call for the vote. All in favor of the motion for the immediate removal of Brenda from her position as president of this homeowners association, please say aye." A deafening roar of "AY" filled the clubhouse. It was nearly unanimous. "All opposed?" Frank asked into the ringing silence. The only sound was Brenda, who let out a choked, sputtering noise of disbelief. "The motion carries," Frank declared. "Brenda is hereby removed from the board, effective immediately." The downfall was swift, public, and brutal. She stood there, stripped of her power in the very room she had intended to use as her stage for my humiliation, exposed as a liar and a thief in front of the entire community. She grabbed her purse, her hands shaking, and stormed towards the exit, firing a final, impotent parting shot. "You'll all regret this. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." The door slammed shut behind her, leaving a stunned, victorious silence in its wake. The aftermath of Brenda's public implosion was as satisfying as it was transformative for our community. The stunned silence in the clubhouse quickly gave way to a wave of relief and quiet celebration. People who had been living under the shadow of her petty tyranny were suddenly talking to each other, comparing notes on violation letters they had been too intimidated to contest. An impromptu election was held right then and there to nominate an interim president. To my surprise, Frank was nominated and accepted on the condition that it was a temporary role to help right the ship. The rest of the board, thoroughly shamed and fearing further scrutiny, agreed to cooperate fully. The first order of business under Frank's leadership was to declare a full amnesty. Every fine and violation notice issued during Brenda's tenure was officially voided. A formal audit of the HOA's finances was launched, and the contract with Oakwood Landscaping was immediately suspended pending investigation. The evidence I had presented was turned over to the new board, who, with Frank's legal guidance, sent a formal demand letter to Brenda to repay the thousands of dollars in HOA funds she had misappropriated for her personal landscaping. They gave her 30 days to comply before they would turn the matter over to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Faced with irrefutable proof and the threat of legal action, she folded. The money was repaid within 2 weeks. Brenda's personal fallout was catastrophic. She had been publicly humiliated in the most absolute way possible. Her power was gone, her reputation was destroyed, and her network of allies on the board had evaporated. The community Facebook group, once her personal megaphone, became a place where residents openly discussed her misconduct. She became a pariah in her own neighborhood. The for sale sign went up in her front yard less than a month after the meeting. I saw the moving trucks pull up on a Saturday morning and watched as her life was packed into boxes. I felt not a shred of pity, only a profound sense of justice served. She had sown the wind, and she had reaped the whirlwind. The final, Ironic postscript to the car story came a few weeks later. The new owner of her house, a friendly young couple, mentioned that they had met Brenda briefly during the closing. They said she had complained at length about the lemon of a Mustang she had just sold at a significant loss, warning them about the neighborhood's nosy and vindictive residents. She had learned nothing. Her victim complex was impenetrable, but the broader impact on our community was profoundly positive. The town hall meeting had been a catalyst. People who had been disengaged from the HOA were now actively involved. Committees were formed to review and simplify the convoluted and often contradictory bylaws. The new board operated with a transparency that was refreshing. Meetings were no longer arenas of intimidation, but forums for productive discussion. We had gone from a neighborhood ruled by a petty dictator to a functioning community. It turned out that getting rid of the bully was the single most effective act of neighborhood beautification we could have undertaken. For me, life returned to a new kind of normal. A better one. The peace I had sought was finally real, earned not by staying quiet, but by speaking up in the most effective way I knew how. My garage was once again my sanctuary, not a supposed crime scene. My hobby was a source of joy, not a violation of some imaginary rule. I learned a valuable lesson through it all. My skills, which I had always seen as niche and technical, were more powerful than I had ever imagined. The ability to find, organize, and present the truth is a form of power that bullies and liars simply cannot withstand. They build their worlds on foundations of lies and intimidation, and a single, well-placed fact can bring the entire structure crashing down. The moral of this story isn't complicated. Bullies, whether they're in a schoolyard or an HOA boardroom, thrive in darkness and wither in the light. They count on you being too tired, too intimidated, or too unwilling to fight back. But documentation is a powerful weapon. Facts are your shield and your sword. And sometimes, the quietest guy in the neighborhood, the one who just wants to be left alone to work on his car, is the last person you should ever try to screw with. So, what's the takeaway from all this? Always keep your receipts, both literal and digital. And never, ever underestimate the power of a well-organized PowerPoint presentation. What's the most ridiculous rule you've ever had to deal with from an authority figure who was clearly on a power trip? Let me know in the comments.